Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are diving into the entirety of Chapter 2 to explore a truly fascinating sequence of historical events. We're going to see exactly how three seemingly distinct historical threads triggered a massive chain reaction that literally still shapes our modern world today. We're going to connect some dots that you might never have thought to connect before, so let's get right into it. Here is our roadmap for Chapter 2. First up, the rise of Islam. Second, an era of innovation. Third, the Crusades. Fourth, we'll look at the effects of the Crusades. And finally, King John and the Magna Carta.
Okay, Section 1, the rise of Islam.
So we begin our journey in the Middle East during the 6th and 7th centuries. A man of humble beginnings named Muhammad emerged as a prophet, and he taught a central principle, the complete surrender to God. Now, this belief in monotheism is absolutely crucial because it makes Islam a foundational sibling to Judaism and Christianity. In fact, Islam highly respects Christians and Jews as people of the book, precisely because of these deeply shared monotheistic roots.
To really understand how this emerging faith unified so many different people, you have to look at its bedrock, which is the 5 pillars. First, you've got faith, the core declaration of belief. Then prayer, which is performed 5 times a day facing Mecca. Third is concern for the poor, requiring a portion of wealth to be given to charity. Fourth, fasting during the holy month of Ramadan for self-purification. And finally, the pilgrimage, or Hajj, a journey to Mecca expected at least once in a person's lifetime. Together, these pillars created this incredibly powerful, unifying structure for everyday life.
And that structural unity, it fueled an absolutely massive geographic expansion. The Islamic calendar actually kicks off in the year 622 with Muhammad's flight to Medina, an event known as the Hijra. Following Muhammad's death in 632, successive rulers called caliphs led this unbelievable period of growth. Through a mix of booming trade networks, missionary work, and military campaigns, the empire spread like wildfire. By the year 750, it had stretched across northern Africa, reached all the way into Spain, and pushed east right to the borders of India and China.
Moving right along to Section 2, an era of innovation.
As this vast continental-spanning empire stabilized, cities like Baghdad transformed into these thriving hubs of pure scholarship. Muslim scholars weren't just passively sitting on trade routes, they were actively recovering and translating ancient Greek and Roman texts. But even more impactfully, they revolutionized mathematics. They borrowed and spread the use of the written numerals 0 through 9. That is literally the exact same Arabic numeral system you type on your phone and use for your everyday math today. It was a total game changer.
Culturally, this era was completely distinct from what was happening over in Europe. While European medieval art was heavily focused on human and animal figures, Islamic art intentionally avoided those. Instead, they focused on these incredibly precise, mind-bending geometric patterns and beautiful natural forms, a stunning style that you can still see perfectly reflected in the magnificent architecture of their mosques.
If you want a sense of just how vast, wealthy, and safe this empire was, just look at the extraordinary real-life journeys of the explorer Ibn Battuta. This guy traveled seamlessly across the entire empire. He used well-established desert caravans to journey from the harsh sands of the Sahara all the way to Delhi in India, and then onward to China. It was a highly connected, incredibly advanced global network.
But, history is rarely isolated for long. As the borders of this massive Islamic empire kept expanding and global trade routes increasingly intersected, we have to ask a critical question. What happens when this immense global power inevitably collides with Christian Europe? Which brings us to Section 3, the Crusades.
This massive collision sparked in the late 11th century when the Byzantine emperor asked Pope Urban II for military help to secure the region and regain control of the Holy Land. Across several centuries of warfare, the logistics of these campaigns shifted dramatically. The First Crusade in 1096 mostly used long, grueling land routes across Europe. It actually successfully captured Jerusalem and established Christian Crusader kingdoms. But later campaigns like the Third and Fourth Crusades relied heavily on sea routes across the Mediterranean and, well, they saw very different, highly unsuccessful outcomes, ultimately failing to hold Jerusalem.
Let's look at Section 4, effects of the Crusades.
These were multi-generational, continent-spanning wars that completely drained resources and profoundly changed populations. Looking at it impartially, the legacy is incredibly messy. On one hand, they unintentionally forced open new trade networks between Europe and the Muslim world. That brought those translated ancient texts back to Europe, which eventually helped kickstart the Renaissance, and the Pope gained massive secular power.
But on the other hand, the cost was horrific. Widespread destruction, the severe persecution of Jewish populations in Europe, and a deeply rooted religious distrust that echoed for centuries.
So what does this all mean for us? This brings us to a really fascinating pivot point in our story. All those international crusades were incredibly expensive. How did the massive financial drain of these overseas conflicts end up completely rewriting foundational laws back in England?
To answer that, we jump to Section 5, King John and Magna Carta. Enter King John of England in the year 1215. This guy was fighting expensive wars, and he was losing. He lost major English-controlled cities in France, and to make up for it, actually scratch that, just to desperately fund his military, he imposed absolutely tyrannical taxes. He even went so far as to take hostages when people couldn't pay up. His unchecked, chaotic behavior accomplished something rare. It completely united both the wealthy nobles, the barons, and the city merchants against him in a massive legal rebellion.
Forced into a corner by his own subjects, King John had to sign a document called the Magna Carta. Clause 9 is a perfect example of their new demands. Basically, it states that government officials cannot take your actual land to pay a debt, as long as you have enough other belongings to cover it. For the very first time, everyday people were demanding and getting real legal protections from overly aggressive government debt collectors. The ultimate, lasting legacy of the Magna Carta is the establishment of a concept we hold incredibly dear today: the rule of law. This is the groundbreaking principle that absolutely nobody gets a free pass. No one is above the law. Not the nobles, not the tax collectors, and definitely not the king himself. He was finally held strictly accountable to the laws of his own land, putting an end to absolute, unchecked royal power. As we wrap up this explainer for Chapter 2, I really want to leave you with this final thought. History is never just a bunch of isolated events trapped in a textbook. The ripple effect of a new religion in Arabia, sparking a golden age of innovation, crashing into Europe through religious war, and ultimately bankrupting a king into accepting the rule of law, it is literally still dictating the math you use on your calculator and the legal rights protecting your home today. Thanks so much for exploring these incredible connections with me, and stay curious.